Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders and influencers who are making headway and some waves in their callings. Today, we are pleased to have with us David Richards, a man whose life story is a testament to the power of resilience and self-awakening. From a near-death experience at age 6 to becoming an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps and now a #1 international best-selling author, David's path has had some twists and turns, but he has continued helping others on his march forward. David's insights challenge conventional wisdom about faith, redemption, and personal growth. Join us now as we delve into David's remarkable journey and uncover the hidden truths he's discovered through the course of his life. Get ready for a great conversation that promises to test your foundations, inspire your spirit, and transform your understanding of belief and leadership. Now, before we roll that intro, please share this with your friends and networks. I know many are going to enjoy this conversation. And there's two other things you could do for us if you could be so kind as to give 5 a.m. Podcast a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player. We would appreciate it. And speaking of appreciation, we want to thank those who ventured over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast and bought us a few of those virtual cups of coffee this week and last. We do appreciate your support. Now, let's roll that intro. David Richards, welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know that our listeners are going to enjoy it, maybe not as much as me. I'm going to enjoy it too. I want to ask you, first off, we'll just jump right in. Your work blends spiritual insights and practical leadership advice. How do you see that connection between spiritual growth, or maybe spiritual mindset, and effective leadership?
To me, it's all about authenticity and integrity. And what I mean by that is when I work with my clients about establishing executive presence, how do you do that? And if you're incongruent, it's going to show up. And what I mean by that is there are really three layers to communication. There's what you're saying, which is only accounts for, if I'm not mistaken, like 7% of communication. Then there's your tone, which is another 33%, but your body language is 56% of communication. And when you put that all together, you realize if you're incongruent, it's going to show up in how you speak. And I worked with a body language expert a few years back, and she would say where if someone is lying, they'll cover up their mouth while they're speaking to you because they don't want you to pay attention to what they're saying, or they'll brush their nose. And it's fascinating when you see how we can't fully lie without
Yes.
covering it up or without disclosing it somehow. And so when it comes to what I do, it's really about how do you become integral? How do you build that authenticity within you so that you can speak with conviction and authority because all three aspects of communication are aligned with a higher sense of what you are inside?
Yeah. So when you're chatting with people that you're coaching, do you find that sometimes there's that spiritual mind versus the scientific mind? And maybe people with that scientific mind have to renew some parts of their mind?
I would look at it a little bit differently. I'd say there are people who are in their analytical brain
Okay,
and people who aren't in their heart.
good.
And oftentimes what happens is I mean, it's paralysis, analysis paralysis kind of
Yes.
thing where you overthink something. And I see that a lot, especially when it comes I won't say most, but many of my clients have a struggle with public speaking, or they want to deliver more impact when they get up to give a presentation or speak. And I've had one just earlier this week, and she said, I get up and then I want to say something during a conversation, but I start questioning, is what I'm going to say adding value? And I said, well, if you're already having that discussion in your head, then you're no longer listening to the conversation. Now you're having this discussion in your head. And I said, if you're really tuned in to what's being said, it's not about you. It's about how do you contribute to this thing, whatever it is. If it's a project plan, if it's a program, it's a vision for your company, how do you contribute to that? And when you come from the heart, then it's not about you. It's about how do I make what we're doing more valuable, more impactful, more useful for people. And when you make that shift, you're not worried about how you're presenting yourself, because when we present ourselves, we're looking for validation. We're looking for that external, like, am I doing okay? Oh my gosh, why is this person looking at me? And when you make it about the project or about the other people, that shift empowers you to speak from a place, I would say, of a more spiritual truth.
Yeah. And I've heard it said often that when we talk about the heart, we're not talking about the blood pump.
Right.
We're
Right.
talking about almost like that electrical energy that is stored. Like there's different gates to our body, but there's also different sources of life, you might say. There's the
Yeah.
wellspring of life. There's what our blood pump, there's those spiritual touch points as well. And then there's like our brain. And when you maybe you can delve into this a little bit because our brain might have a different function than what we've been told versus the heart versus our wellspring of life.
I love that. About, gosh, I guess it's been about 6 years now, towards the end of 2019. So I published my first book in 2017, and this was after 11 years of trying to write horror stories because I wanted to become the next Stephen King.
Okay.
And then I switched gears in 2017. I read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And in the book, in the first or second chapter, he says, "What is the purpose of your life?" And that question just blew me away. I was just like, you're telling me there's a true north in my life that I can navigate to. So I wrote my first book, and I bring it up because it was an exploration into quantum physics. And it was the idea that I really came from my practice as a yoga instructor about there's more to us than just the mind and the body. There's this awareness behind those things. And it was such an unconventional approach compared to a Judeo-Christian upbringing that I experienced in the West. But that led me into quantum physics. Quantum physics then led me into someone named Dr. Joe Dispenza. And if you're not familiar with his work, he wrote a book called Becoming Supernatural, one of his books. And in the book, he talks about how the brain generates an electrical frequency or signal, and the heart generates a magnetic signal. And how you think and how you feel becomes this electromagnetic frequency that you are generating into the universe. It is, I mean, if you know anything about quantum physics, everything is energy vibrating at frequency. And so this connection between your mind and brain, or your mind and your heart, is your state of being.
Yes.
And so when you speak from that place where you have a clear intention of what you're trying to accomplish in an elevated emotion, you can speak with power, you can speak with clarity
Uh-huh.
because it's communicating something out. And they've done studies. There's a great professor named Dr. David Hawkins who actually wrote an entire book on how different emotional states lead to different frequencies. So if you are feeling love or gratitude, that's a much different frequency than if you're feeling anger or shame, which are lower frequencies. You start to realize that, then you get to a place where you say, well, okay, if I'm really living in my heart, and I'm looking at every other person I meet with compassion and love because they have a journey that is uniquely different than mine, and yet is also universally human, I can bond and connect with them in a way that if I'm stuck in myself, I'm not going to
Yeah.
be able to.
Right. And ladies and gentlemen, we can actually see how where these power forms are off,
Yeah.
disease comes in
Yep.
or peace comes in. Peace like a river. There's so many things like even coming from a Christian point of view and understanding there's a spiritual realm. It's like how Jesus talked to the Pharisees about you have a form of godliness, but you deny its power.
Yeah.
And the quantum physics, I'm so glad when I started reading about that and understanding that the words we speak, our thoughts become words. We have actions mixed with faith, as it says in the Holy Scriptures.
Right.
But talk a little bit about understanding, like what Jesus said to those Pharisees. Well, he said, "You're whitewashed tombs. You're full of dead men's bones."
Right.
And it was like he was trying to get them to think on a completely different level, like what you're saying about quantum physics. So let's dive into this component about that almost that admonition that Christ in this case was giving to the spiritual priest class of a nation.
Yeah. So what a beautiful discussion. This is great. So what was Jesus really saying? He was kind of chastising the Pharisees because they were about the law, but they weren't practicing. They weren't living it. They weren't embodying it. When you look at how the Bible is structured, one of the great experiences I had in my life was during my second master's degree in the military. Was we spent the first week doing a speed reading course. We
Okay.
spent the second week, or the second 2 weeks, I think, focusing on how to read a book. And I was like, What do you mean, how do
Yeah.
you read a book? Oh, you just open and start flipping. And the book in question was a 700-page behemoth that this Prussian colonel had written. He had fought
Nice.
during the time of Napoleon, but
Wow.
it's a theory of on war. And it was 4 books in one, but the professor said it's actually 2 books. And he explained how the book was structured. And then we used
Yes.
that for the next 11 months to go through the program. I started looking at the Bible from a similar standpoint, and you realize that the Old Testament is about separation.
Yeah.
It's from the separation of light and dark, from the fall out of the Garden of Eden, from the Holy of Holies, where the priests can only go into the,
Mm-hmm.
behind there one day for the Day of Atonement. There's all this separation. And then Jesus talks about union. It's,
Yes.
the kingdom of God is within you. And when you start to realize that, I can't speak for your experience, Michael, from so much of my life,
Yeah.
I grew up with this belief, almost a conviction that God's outside
Mm.
because
Mm-hmm.
that's what was
That's
taught.
what we hear.
Yeah. And you realize as soon as you understand even an inkling of quantum physics, it radically
Yeah.
alters.
Absolutely.
It's a complete paradigm shift because now when you hear or read Jesus say, I am the light of the world, that becomes a completely different meaning because now it's, well, do I see that light universally or do I see it conditionally? Because if I see it conditionally, that's a problem with me. That's not a problem with something outside of me. And so then if I also put that together with, well, the kingdom is within me, well, how do I restore or fortify that kingdom? How do I bring that to life within me? And that again is the internal journey of the mind and the heart and looking for coherence between those two. So that you are broadcasting a frequency of those higher frequency emotions that we
That's right.
talked about, whether it's love or bliss or what have you.
Yeah, and we look beyond the pages of just the mere words that are
Yes.
written there
Yes.
to understand that there's so much more depth to what we've been told. There's many years ago, I was on this journalistic assignment. I was doing some field production, some reporting. I met this much younger reporter fellow who we had a pretty good rapport. And he was saying, okay, so you're 20 years ahead of me in career. And he said, "What advice could you give me?" And I said, "Well, ask me for an apple." And he said, "Well, okay, Michael, can I have an apple?" I said, "No, sorry, I don't have one." It was like, "Well, I could see that." And I said, "Well, get this whole point. We go through life having to ask people for things, and then when they can't give them to us, we get upset with them." And I said, "You have to look beyond and understand that people can only give you what they have." And I wanted to ask you about how you've coached executives. Have you seen a common spiritual or personal obstacle that are holding these leaders back from even leveling up higher in their skills and abilities?
The common theme that I see is people look for something outside themselves. I mean, and it's almost universal, right? We look for relationships outside ourselves. We look for someone to complete us, if I can go back to Jerry
Yeah,
Maguire.
yeah,
And when I look at executives or people I've worked with, senior directors and like, they are looking to get a reaction from someone outside of them. And what we say is, "Oh, well, change the action or reaction within you,
yeah,
and then you'll get a change in them."
yeah.
And when you can speak to a place, and really it comes down to, Tony Robbins. I'm a huge fan of Tony Robbins. I've
Yes.
worked in his community now for a couple of years. And he talks about the power of incantations and how all you need is within you now. And he talks about how you can intellectually understand something, you can emotionally understand something, and then you can actually get something into your nervous system where it becomes a part of your identity. That's what I see as the biggest disconnect a lot of times with executives is, especially for those who are transitioning into the executive level, right? So I'm used to tactical success and tactical execution. I can manage very effectively because there's a structure to management. It's very
Yeah,
mechanical. I
right.
just have to make these fixes or adjustments and look how the metrics adjust accordingly. When it comes to leadership and creating strategic vision, that's an inside job. Like that's an inside job that's looking at where do we need to go? Where does this team need to go? And how do we get there? How do I influence and inspire and uplift through the power of my words? That is a very radical shift for some people, but it is
Hmm.
about, I mean, the whole purpose of coaching is to extract what's already inside of you and realize that the more authenticity you can bring to what you're saying and how you're communicating with people, the greater
Hmm.
impact you're going to have.
Yes. And we can look to different spiritual teachings and influences. And like, for example, there's two things that I think that are really appropriate to what you're saying is when God called his creation good, And so other people might have other creation stories. I get it. But so when the one who made everything called it good, and then we see his son at the end of his mission before he was going to pass on, let's say, spread the uniting. Because I love what you said about there's the separation and the uniting mission.
Yeah.
But then Jesus Christ claimed it's finished, which means that that goodness had returned to humanity.
Right.
And so, with what you're saying, we could talk a little bit more about how maybe people are digging a hole to hit rock bottom, but they can actually look within themselves and say, well, this was declared good. This was declared it is finished. So now my job is actually,
Oops.
wow, I'm back.
I don't know what happened.
No, I just had a thing on my screen. We must be talking about too much good truth.
We must be, clearly.
We're still recording. That's good. Oh, there'll be two recordings. But yeah, just talk about how we actually don't have to go. We go to the store to pick up groceries because somebody else made the groceries and stocked the shelves, but we actually have stock shelves within us already.
Yeah.
How do we uncover that?
I had the good fortune to see Dr. Jordan Peterson. He was in town last week here just in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
And he was here last year. So this was before his last book came out, We Who Wrestle with God, which brilliant. I don't know how thick it is. It's probably like 700 pages, but it's a brilliant book. And one of the things that he says in that book is, in filth it will be found. Like that which we most want to find will be found where we least want to look.
Yes.
And for so many people, especially in the Western culture, that's inside. Like the Eastern culture, I had the good fortune to spend 3 years in Japan growing up as a kid. And even though I was a kid, I could appreciate how radically different Eastern philosophy and Eastern culture was. And the sense of oneness in Buddhism or even Hinduism or Taoism is much more accessible than, honestly, than monotheism traditionally is. And because this propensity we have to externalize God in this way that quantum physics seems to deny. And as a result of that, what you find is that people don't want to do the inside journey, especially, I can't speak for Canadian culture, but in the United States in particular, we have such a striving culture, right? I mean, we have a population of 350 million that's produced the world's largest economy, compared with China that's got 1.2 billion people and has, I think, the second largest economy. So there's this almost manic desire and drive to produce, and that doesn't allow for a lot of introspection. And that's where it's really found, is by going inside. I mean, the kingdom is within you. So how do you
Absolutely.
restore and create that kingdom? And there is an internal navigation that you get to undertake. And to me, I mean, that's kind of the adventure of your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you bring up that kingdom is within you because those true words have not been spoken. It's just that some of us, because of history and how, let's say, thought and religion and family has grown up over generations, we've been told it's external.
Right.
We think it's like getting into an airplane, but
That's exactly right.
we actually have everything in our mind and in our heart, in our
Yeah.
soul. It's all there. One carpenter fellow that his wife was friends with my late mother-in-law, and he and I would have great conversations over the dinner table. And he said to me, Michael, if you can draw it, we can build it. And it's marvelous to think of the capacity that we all have as human beings, capacity to make ourselves happy or sick or healthy or just run the gamut. Put your word in there that you want. But let's talk about affirmations because
Yeah.
that's our thoughts
Yeah.
becoming words and vibrations out into the world. And a lot of people will say, "Oh no, if you want to manifest things, you have to astral travel. You have to learn how to do this. You have all these hard fought battles to get into this one thing, and you've got your that silver cord that attaches the astral traveler to their human connection, and you don't want
Right.
to get that severed when you're out there."
Right.
But there's those easy things. I think if creation was good, it's actually easy once we discover it. And it talks about in Proverbs how it's the glory of kings to search out a matter, and it's actually to God's glory to hide a matter to make us search for it. And I firmly believe that the road needs to be easy and the burden needs to be light because that's the whole light, as in the light source that's shining on me, but light and weight too, in that there's a connection to us all. But let's talk about those affirmations and why they're actually so powerful.
Yeah, so I actually like to consider incantations, and the
Okay.
difference between the two is emotion, right? So I can say an affirmation like I am genius or I am
Okay.
worthy or I am love. And it's useful because as you said, sound is vibration. And so I'm putting that out into the universe and I'm also putting it into my physiology.
Yes,
If I
absolutely.
s- if I say I am love, I am genius, I am brilliant, and I get my body into it and I get my emotion into it, we know that is going to create a stronger neural connection inside our nervous system. And so doing it with the emotional intensity, not only does it create those strong neural connections, and what I'm talking about when I say neural connections for your audience is imagine by now in this point in your life, imagining most of you have tied your shoelaces thousands
Yes.
of times. So you don't have to consciously think about one lace goes over the other one, then I make this little twist, then I cinch it down and it's tight. It's just automatic because you have built a neural connection in your brain and your nervous system for tying your shoelaces. Why can't faith be the same thing? Why can't I say, like, I am love? I am unconditional love. I see the love of light of Christ in everything and everyone. The more emotional intensity, the stronger that neural connection forms.
Yeah.
Additionally, when we speak with emotion, we talk about our heart getting into our heart. We're putting that emotion throughout our entire body. So that nervous system, as it starts to form those neural synapses or the connections between the neural synapses or the neurons, that emotion goes in with it. You repeat that after a while, it just becomes automatic. So you don't have to think about I am love. You don't think about I see the love and light of Christ in everyone. It just becomes part of your reality. And we know, as you said, the words we use to describe an experience become our experience. So we are, in that sense, creators of our own reality. Because if
That's
I
right.
say this is really nice compared to this is magnificent,
Yeah,
that's a different experience from me. If I just
absolutely.
say, "Oh, she's a really good friend," compared to, "She is my soulmate, she's incredible," those are 2 different experiences that I'm
Yeah.
having of the same person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the word becomes flesh
Yes, absolutely.
and and dwells among us.
Yeah,
There's so much hidden in what is written on a page if we don't want to dig into it and understand how connected all of those threads are through idea and through what we speak and what we like. Someone could get some beeswax and manifest a candle that will
right,
warm
right.
their home or give them light to read by.
That's
And
right,
I want to ask you a question about you've mentioned in the past about equipping individuals with tools for their spiritual journey.
right.
Let's talk about some of these tools and maybe how they might differ or they might expand upon traditional religious practices.
So the first one is what we just talked about, incantations. The power of your voice, the
Yeah.
power I mean, we know words are the precursor to creation because in order if you and I are going to work on a project together, I have to communicate what it is that I envision our project is going to look like. And that's how that becomes something that comes into existence. So incantations are huge. And I do incantations every single day. Every single, even if it's just 5 minutes, I'll do incantations. I have a rebounder here behind me. If I'm in my truck driving somewhere for 20 minutes, I will do incantations at the top of my lungs because I know the emotional intensity
Yeah.
is going to make it further in. The other piece is it sounds funny, but quantum physics. Because when you understand literally that every single thing in existence is energy vibrating at frequency, it changes how you look at the world. It changes how you see the world. And when you understand that, then you start to see there is an interconnectedness. And when you see if we all share the mind of Christ, then that's not a conditional qualification based on someone's belief. That's a universal truth. Someone may have a different experience of that mind because of what they believe, but I'm not going to say, well, because this person's Muslim, because this person's Jewish, because this person's Hindu, that Christ isn't pervading or present in their life. Because to me, it's a universal understanding, and that's the biggest gift that I've gotten from my understanding of quantum physics. Is once you see that it's all connected, it's all energy vibrating at frequency, it transforms. So even a modest understanding of quantum physics, I feel, is so impactful. The third piece I would say is journaling. When I was working my third book, I stopped consciously focusing on the book and I journaled for about 2 years, just trying to figure out kind of how to put this thing together. And what I discovered was journaling was not only a powerful vessel or vehicle for me to get in contact with myself, like to communicate with myself,
Yeah.
but it was a huge enabler for me to be able to coherently put together my thoughts, not just so I could communicate to myself, but so I could communicate them to other people. And when you listen to someone like Dr. Peterson speak, you realize there is a value to being able to coherently articulate to yourself what you believe or what you value so you can express that to other people and at the same time explain it and understand them as well.
Yeah. And I was thinking as you were talking, about how we see in other people. And I always felt like there's a good litmus test. My dad would tell me, does it steal your peace or does it give you peace?
Mm.
As one.
Yeah,
The other one is we know that there's light and darkness in our world, and one comes to steal, kill, and destroy. The other one comes to give us abundant life. There's nature. Just think of a rose bush that you have to prune. It only knows abundance. You have to restrict that rose bush to get bigger blossoms. It just wants to give you as much as it can.
right,
That abundance is all around us. And I was thinking, as you were talking about, so the incantation versus the affirmation and the force and the effort that we put behind it. And I never thought of, like, let's say, not being able to cuss and swear or curse in our house when I was growing up. Well, you realize even like the word damn comes from damnation, of sending someone to damnation. And you think, what are my words accomplishing? If
right,
if and so that way we actually have to read and write and get the feeling of words and their power and understand them and then say, "Oh, I can actually bless my neighbor." Like we've heard the words of love your neighbor as yourself.
right.
Oh man, that means I have responsibility to the young couple across the road and the retired people next to me.
Yes, you do.
And isn't it wonderful, though, that we can actually build the community we want
Sure.
around us? Can you talk a little bit about building community, maybe not in that sense, but through your understanding of it?
Yeah. So it's what we see in someone else is a reflection of what we see in ourselves to a certain extent, right? And so if we another good thing that Dr. Peterson says in his latest book is he pulls on the story of Elijah. And he says the biggest revelation from Elijah's story is that we don't find God in the wind or the fire or the earthquake, but by attending to the inner voice of conscience. And it's huge because then you say, well, and he goes on to explain this is profound. This is because now there's a relational possibility to the creator, the higher power. And it's not that we find it, even as inspiring as nature is, we don't find it in nature. We find it wonderfully and terribly inside of us all. He goes on to explain then that the aim of what you're trying to achieve will be met by the spirits of that aim. So, said another way, if, for example, if we're going to work together and I say, oh my gosh, I have this great idea. I have a movie idea project. Let's work on this movie idea thing. And there's a nobility behind what this movie will mean for people, then we're going to be answered as we put that together by the spirit of that aim.
Yeah.
If on the other hand, I say, you know what, I think I could maybe pull one over on Michael. I think I could get him to, pay me some money for this deal. And then I'm going to back out of the deal and leave town.
As it happens. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and so but so my desire to take money from you, I will be in trying to achieve that. I will be answered by the spirits of that aim, the demons of that aim, if you
Yes.
will.
Yeah.
So in that sense, when you're in contact with someone, and I had this conversation with someone last night too, is my faith in Christ is universal. I see his light everywhere. So when I meet someone who doesn't share the same beliefs, and last night I had a conversation with an atheist, and we were talking about his belief in nihilism and things like that. It was a very respectful and informed conversation because I said, I believe that he's still got a hold of you, even if your hold on him is really tenuous. And there's no judgment because your experience of life has been completely different from mine. So to create a community, we have to nourish what is ultimately the highest good inside of us so that we can then, through our leadership and example, inspire and extract that from those around us. And that is, in my sense, of how we build community.
Yeah. And every seed produces after its own kind.
Right.
And
Exactly.
it's almost, well, we're all free agents.
Right.
So we can determine that we want to rip off our business partners. We can determine that we want to build up our neighbors. There's so much more we could talk about. And we're not wrapping up quite yet, but I want to do a little call to action for your website. So can you tell people how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so it's available at davidrichardsauthor.com. My books are there. It's going to be undergoing some construction soon as my next book gets ready to get published, but David Richards Author is how you can find me.
Cool. The reason I wanted to promote that for the moment, I wanted to ask you about a couple of your books. And the first one I wanted to ask you about was the Love Letters to the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
That was a very intriguing title.
Yeah.
Can you get into that a little bit? Our Catholic friends might be chomping at the bit to know what that's all about.
Yeah. So it was started during the pandemic.
Okay.
And there is one Bible verse that you could say that entire book is based upon. And
Okay.
I want to say it's Luke 132, where Mary finds out that she's going to be giving birth to Jesus. The angel Gabriel says, your son will be called Son of the Most High, and he will be given the throne of his father David. And I get into it more in my next book, but that is the basis for that story, right? It's kind of this story that if the heaven and earth to come together, there has to be a recipient of both kind of God's judgment, but an anchor point for Jesus's return. And what most people overlook, at least in my talks with them, is King David does not ascend to heaven. So that's Acts 2:34. You find out that King David does not ascend to heaven. And when you look at the Davidic covenant, the promise to David of an eternal kingdom and an everlasting throne that Jesus has the responsibility for establishing, that's kind of how that evolves is, okay, well, if David doesn't ascend to heaven, then where is he? And how does that relationship between King David and Jesus get reconciled, since there
Wow.
is a promise of an
Yeah.
eternal dynasty of kings between the two of them? And that's kind of what that book is about. And it's just the
Fascinating.
idea that a human being sees on Instagram a picture of this woman and knows that he's seen the picture before, and then he undergoes this journey of revelation to discover that he is King David, basically rising
Wow.
from the dead.
That's an exciting
It's it's intense. Yeah, it's got some. It's if you see the book cover too, it's got Thor's hammer on it, and
Okay.
that came from. I was watching the first Thor movie that came out, I think, in 2013, and 50 minutes into the movie, there's a scientist who pulls a book off a bookshelf, and on the bookshelf is a reference to King David.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, that's pretty
Wow.
intriguing,
That
because
is
then
intriguing.
it also gets into Thor was worshipped by the German tribes during the time of the Roman attempt to conquest Germania. Jewelers actually found hammers and crosses in their jewelry, or they found, I guess archaeologists have found jewelry molds that had a Thor hammer or a cross or Jesus, because they
Right.
didn't know what
Yeah.
customers wanted from their deities at the time. But then it also kind of ties into the Holocaust as well.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. And if we think of some of those powerful words of as he is, so are we in this world.
Right.
Speaking of Jesus, and as a man thinks in his heart.
So is he.
Thanks, James Allen. We appreciate that book.
That's right.
But yeah,
Well, I was just going to say that I remember that book, As a Man Thinketh, is huge, because
huge.
thoughts are things.
Yeah.
Thoughts are things. And that's connecting that to when I read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. One of the things he says in that book is whatever someone believes, whatever someone can conceive of, if
Yeah.
they believe it, they can achieve it.
Yeah.
And that in itself is kind of the journey to faith. And that is also, how do you bring something into existence, whether it's a movie, whether it's a book, how do you do something? It takes an internal growth
Yeah.
to bring that about. That
That's
is the
right.
act of creation.
Yeah. And seeing as how you mentioned that the Bible verse from Luke chapter 1, there's another one that fits extremely well with what we're talking about. It's Luke 145. And so this is when Mary is visiting her cousin Elizabeth. And Elizabeth says to Mary, "Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord's word to her will be fulfilled."
Mm,
And
yeah,
so, ladies and gentlemen, just think, as he was, so are we in this world. That might be a foreign concept to you, but dig into the stuff that David and I are talking about, because we don't want to be walking around like whitewashed tombs just full of a dead man's bones,
right.
or having a form of divinity or godliness and then missing out on the power.
Right.
And if we think of how we've been set in place, there's, our steps. It says the steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord. But if you think in terms of that spiritual realm, that the people that we connect with and we flow through life with, like the river of life, and being able to walk with others for a certain period of time. There was a lesson I learned early on in life, and maybe you can speak to this too, like the spiritual side of relationships, because we had a minister tell us that everyone isn't open is a gift. It's up to us whether we open it or not.
Right. Oh,
And
it's so true.
so I'll just finish this and then I'll ask for your feedback on it. You enter into business relationships with some negative people or some unpleasant people, and that used to really bother me. Why can't they be a nice guy? But then I realized, no, wait a second. He's got a gift for me. I have a gift for him. And it's my fault if I don't open his gift that he's given me. So do you want to elaborate on that?
It's the idea that every Einstein once said, either everything is a miracle or nothing is.
Yeah.
And what I've come to appreciate about faith is you can't make it conditional. You can't make it subjective. If for me to believe that Christ is universal, that means everyone I come in contact with is on their own journey, and yet that journey ultimately comes to Christ
It
because no
has
one
to.
comes to the Father except through him.
Yeah.
And when you operate from that space, then you realize every single person you meet, regardless of where they are on that journey,
Yeah.
that's their destination. That's their ultimate destination. And so my interaction with them must be treated with the reverence and love and compassion that that relationship demands. Even if it's someone just asking me for 30 seconds of their time, like what does this conversation say? And how do I uplift this person? How do I connect with this person to
Uh-huh.
move them forward on their journey,
Yeah.
even in that some way? And when you meet that resistance, how do you overcome that? How do you deal with that in a way that's full of grace and realize that if I'm meeting resistance from this person, it might be because they're suffering, or it also could be something that I'm stuck on too. And how do I shift and pivot to make that gift, to learn from them what I'm meant to learn from them?
That's right.
When you start to look at life that way, then it opens up completely because you realize it's to live your faith universally and 24 hours a day means that everyone who comes in to your life comes with a purpose of some kind.
Yeah, that's right. And even like if you think of we could we could get into yin and yang and the
Yeah.
percentages of yin that are in yang. And there's a reason for that, that there's like zero yin and yang. If I understand that correctly, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so I want to say I think it was last year. It may have been 2 years ago. They did. So yin and yang is the black fish with the white
Yes.
eye and the white fish with the black eye. And they did a visual scan of what quantum entanglement looks like. And
Wow.
quantum entanglement is the idea that you can have two particles that are separated by millions of miles.
Yeah.
And if you impact one of the particles, the other particle is going to respond instantly faster than the speed of light. It's
Yes.
mind-boggling when you first hear it. This visual scan appears as yin and yang.
Wow.
So it actually appears as the symbol, and it's not black and white, but it was like
Right.
one was like green with a red fish or a red eye, and then the other one's red with a green
Yeah.
eye.
Yeah.
But it was yin and yang. You're like, okay, that's deep. Like
It is very deep.
that's super deep. Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the part of there's actually no distance in this with those two components, that one could be in London, one could be at Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena, and you hit one and the other one gets hit
Instantaneously.
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 And
Faster than the speed of light.
it's even how our houseplants, they know when we're like a mile away from our house. They'll react. My dog, our dog, I should say, will know when we're coming home from church or being out with friends. That dog is ready. Growing up, maybe some people will sleep better knowing this, but we had a great bearded, long-haired collie, not bearded collie, long-haired collie. She was a wonderful, intelligent dog. Her name was Ringo. And so my brother and I were both at college. He was like a 3 hour drive from home. I was about five. And my mom would say, every time you guys are about, if we let our mom know when we were leaving, she'd say, every time you're about 2 hours away, that dog goes to the door and
That's
stands and
amazing.
waits for you guys to come home.
That's amazing. Well, and you bring up such a great point. So let's talk about this really to pull it back biblically and
Yeah.
then beyond.
Yeah.
So in the Psalms, David prophesies Christ's crucifixion 600 years before the Romans invent it as a form of torture.
Wild.
So think about
Yeah.
just the prescience of that. And obviously, David, we know in reading Second Samuel, is possessed by the Spirit of the Lord. So there's obviously some implications there. Well, fast forward now into modernity, right? In the early, I think the early late 1800s or early 1900s, someone wrote a book called The Wreck of the Titan about an English luxury liner that sinks in the North Atlantic after hitting an iceberg.
Okay.
14 years later, the Titanic sinks in the North Atlantic after hitting an iceberg. 24 years before Pearl Harbor, someone wrote a book called The Great Pacific War, and it was about a surprise attack on a naval air base by the Japanese, or
Wow.
a navy base by the Japanese in the Pacific. And to even bring it into further in time, in 1997, there was a book written called The Fourth Turning. And it was two gentlemen, I forget their names, but they had studied 500 years of Anglo-Saxon history to see that there are patterns in life. There
Hmm.
are patterns, and
Yeah.
patterns usually run in 80 years. And if you look at the constitutional crisis in the United States from the 1780s to the Civil War in 1865 to World War II in 1945 to what leads ahead, they predicted in 1997 there would be a pandemic in 2020.
Wow.
So you see, so it's again this thing that there's all this connection. It's not just the quantum of proximity. It's
Yeah.
also
You're right.
this what do I see and what am I tuning into that I see coming in the future.
Yeah. And that was, I just looking it up on the interwebs, William Strauss and Neil
Strauss.
Howe,
Yeah, thank you.
ladies and gentlemen,
Strauss and
if you're
Howe.
looking for that fourth turning. And I think this is why we need to be loving and kind. It's like that, the Bible, and I know other religions and ideas talk about that need for love, that everything has to be done through love.
Right.
And we might say I'm a little short on it, but that's okay because there's an abundance of
There
these
is.
good things. And with those affirmations and incantations, we can actually build ourselves up. Like coming from that traditional Christian, hearing it in Sunday school and other places, of we can build ourselves up in our most holy faith. And then we have to treat our neighbor as we treat ourselves. Then we realize, oh, we actually want to build our neighbors up in this most holy faith. And it's, we can take the labels and the titles off of it, because we know that there's just a kingdom of darkness and a kingdom of light, and we can help each other navigate life's path through that. So I guess we need to probably wrap things up here, but I wanted to ask you, looking ahead, what do you see as maybe the most critical spiritual challenges facing our communities, maybe North America or humanity at large? And do you have any insights that might be able to address that?
I feel like we live in an attention economy, right? There is, you know, when I was growing up, we had 3 or 4 television channels. And that was your view, your snapshot into the
Yeah.
bigger world,
Yeah.
whether it was ABC, CBS, what have you, that and the newspaper. And then you had books, and these books came from different places, and you learned about the world. And now the world is so interconnected, and yet everyone's vying for your attention, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Instagram, whether it's the news, whether it's politicians tweeting or doing whatever. And as a result, we've kind of developed this shallow intake of life because we've diffused our attention and awareness to deal with all these competing needs demanding our attention. I feel like there's something called the singularity. And there's the idea that within the next anywhere from 3 to 10 years, we'll transcend human biology.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
because as AI gets smarter and we get smarter because of AI, there's going to be this shift. To me, and part of what I write about in Love Letters to the Virgin Mary is the idea, well, if heaven and earth are supposed to come together at the end of the Bible,
Yeah.
how does that happen? And you start to look at, well, we know heaven's not somewhere that we can see because we haven't found it on the moon. It's not on Jupiter. So it must be another universe. And that sounds far-fetched, but we see the multiverse concept coming up in Facebook. We see it in movies. Google just had a chip, the quantum chip Willow, at the end of last year, solved a problem in 5 minutes that our best supercomputers would have taken 10 septillion years to solve. 10 septillion. And they've said, well, it still has to be computing. Quantum computing is light years ahead of our regular computing today, which is very binary. But they said it still has to be doing all the calculations to get to the solution. And so it must be computing in other universes.
Yeah. Wow.
And so where I feel like we're coming to a nexus where the shallow attention span thing is going to run its course, and it's going to be a shift to people want meaning. People want to deepen their sense of themselves. And I feel like that's what's coming. If you ask me in the next couple of years, that's where we're headed, is this revelation that I don't have to be subject to the whims of my news outlet or social media and looking into other people's worlds. I need to stand guard at the doorway of my mind and be discreet on what I allow in, because everything that I consume becomes a part of me in some way. And if I'm negligent in managing that, I'm going to be overwhelmed by all the information out there. So I feel like the shift that's happening and that's coming is a pivot to real inner transformation and awakening as we draw closer to understanding how technology is actually aiding us. Because, I mean, face it, I mean, just I grew up, if there are things that if I needed to find them out 30 or 40 years ago, it could have taken me weeks to find out. The learning process was that extended. Now I can find them out in seconds. And that is something that billions of us have access to every single day. So that is, to me, I mean, if I could give you a bullet point or an elevator
Yeah.
pitch, it's the log line is, my take is, we are on the edge of the next shift in global consciousness based on where we're going.
Yeah, and there's definitely been shifts in ages. And I like what you, in talking about television and newspaper, if we think north, east, west, and south, ladies and gentlemen, the news tells you which way to go. It's like a compass that
Right.
the people that put those words on the page want you to go. And just like television, the gentleman who started this technology, they were using it because they wanted to speak to people on the other side of the spiritual veil. They wanted to speak to the dead and those other spirits that were there. And that's why we have channels.
Yeah.
Channel 2, channel 3.
I love this.
That's where it all comes from, ladies and gentlemen. But I think I see by the clock on the wall, the other great well, we haven't got into Kronos or other principalities or powers like that, but
Not yet.
we should probably wrap it up. David, I'm going to have you back on because there's so much more that we could talk about.
I would
And
love to, Michael. This has been rewarding. Thank you so much for
yeah,
having me.
good. Well, before we do wrap up, I want to remind our listeners and viewers that David has generously provided free resources to help you on your journey, and you can access those tools at davidrichardauthor.com/thought pieces, or even go /media. You're going to find some great stuff there. And we want to thank David for his time and being generous with us and having this great conversation. David, thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was great. And thank you to our viewers. You guys and gals have made this rewarding for David and myself too. As I often say when I'm wrapping the episode, it's like we've been in a diner. And as you do when you're in a diner, you eavesdrop on the people behind you. So thank you for listening in and eavesdropping as we've had this great, fulfilling conversation. We appreciate you being here. If you haven't already, could you be so kind as to share this with your friends? Even your enemies. It maybe will move them from enemy to frenemy and then to friend. So share this with those people that you care about and know that need some work, because we all need work, right? And also, if you could subscribe if you're watching this and give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player, we would appreciate that. And I absolutely want to end the show with gratitude and thanks to those who have ventured over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast and helped us out by giving us a few virtual bucks. And those 5-star review people, thank you too for helping us grow this channel and for your support. We appreciate it. We want you to seize your day and also get up and enjoy those sunrises and sunsets. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Michael Clausen.